Hilches Sha'ar Avos Hatumos Perek Shishi. Tumas Avodah Zarah Medivrei Seifrim. The fact that Avodah Zarah is metame is a drabanan. But v'yesh lo remez b'teira. The pasuk says, "Hasiru es lekei hanecha asher b'seichachem v'hitaru v'achlifu sim leisechem." This was Yankov was speaking to the children after they fought with Shechem, that hitaru v'achlifu sim leisechem, was to get rid of any Avodah Zarah. So the Pashas v'hitaru doesn't mean an of Tumah V'Tara. It was lifnei matan Torah. There was no musig of Tumah V'Tara. But rather it means hitaru from the musig of Avodah Zarah. But Lepel, the pasuk uses the word v'hitaru, so that's the remez that Avodah Zarah is metame. Now varbo Avos Hatumos yeshba. There's the Avodah Zarah atzma. That's one avatuma, and also mishamsheh, something that's used. Let's say the Avodah Zarah. Let's say a keli or something that's used to pour to the Avodah Zarah. Over takreva shelo, something you're makriv to the Avodah Zarah, and also v'yayin shenisnasachlo. So there are four tumas b'Avodah Zarah: the Avodah Zarah itself, the mishamshi Avodah Zarah, the takrevis Avodah Zarah, and also yayin shenisnasachlo. The tumas kula midivreim, the tumah of all these four are midrabon. Now Avodah Zarah atzma mitame adam v'keli b'mago uklicheres ba'aver b've'ena mitame b'masa kisheretz. Shenem shakes shaktzenu, which goes in Avodah Zarah, the lashon shakes shaktzenu. So that pasuk teaches us that Avodah Zarah has a din of a sheketz, of a sheretz. So Mela, just like a sheretz is not metame b'maso, so in the same way Avodah Zarah is not metame b'maso. Now v'shiur kezayis. If you're comparing it to a sheretz has a kula that it's not metame b'masa, but on the other end it has a chumrah that it's metame b'keseira. B'kadasha rather, it's Musame b'kadasha. So that's the chiddush. No, we're saying over here that on one hand it's not metame b'masa because it has a din of a sheretz, and on the other hand it's shiur kezayis because leitia zu chamurim min hames, because a mess is only b'kezayis. So memela, so it doesn't have that chumrah of being kedadasha. So memela Avodah Zarah also is leitia chamurim min hames. Even though they had the whole tzura, but the tzura was pchusim mikazayis is teira, is nachamos. Avodah Zarah is metame, it's metame b'maga, and also klicheres ba'aver. It's not metame b'masa, which is like a sheretz, but on the other hand, it needs a kazayis, which is like a mess. So it has like both kulas, the kula of a sheretz, and also the kula of a mess. Now, lepel, the pasuk shakas shaksenu. So there's a kasha, the lechura, the Rambam said before, that Tumas Avodah Zarah has a smach min hatera. The smach min hatera is v'hitaru v'achlifas im lisechem. L'chura we have a smach min hatera, shakas shaktzelu, that has a din of a sheketz, has a din of a sheretz. So why do we need the other smach min hatera? So in the Sichas, the Rebbe talks about it. The Rebbe says that be'emes Avodah Zarah, you become tummy from Avodah Zarah, but be'emes it's not the pshat is that really the chefts of the Avodah Zarah is davar hametame. The chefs Avodah Zarah is a davar of that's not really a metzias. Since it's Avodah Zarah, it's asur b'ano. It's not really a metzias. So Mela doesn't even have that. It should have the chefs should be tummy. It causes a person that's involved with the Avodah Zarah should become tummy, but the Avodah Zarah itself wouldn't be called a davar hatami, and therefore the Ram Taka doesn't. We don't learn it out from shakas shaktzenu because a sheketz is taka a davar hamatami. So Memela sounds like that, like Avodah Zarah is also a davar hamatami. So we say no, we learn out v'hitara. The gavra has to be Torah. It's a din of the gavra, not in the chefs. That's what the Rebbe's masber l'kut sichas and chelik lamet. I'll call upon him the din of Avodah Zarah is metame b'maga, not b'masa. It's also metame ba'aver klicheres, and it has to be a kezayis in order to be metame. Halachi gimel. Kotzatz aver mimenu. If you took off an aver from the Avodah Zarah, even if the Avodah Zarah is still the size of a mardeya, which a mardeya is the keli which you use in order to direct the animal, a long keli which you direct in order to direct the animal to go in its proper path, is arezu tor. Avodah Zarah eine metame leivorim. And those Avodah Zarah is only when there's an entire Avodah Zarah, only then is it metamer. El hatzura kula kshihi shleima. There's a din that Avodah Zarah, in order for Avodah Zarah to be metame, mashlan mes there's a din, kazayis min hames is metame, or kadash min hasheretz is metame. By Avodah Zarah, first of all, it has to have the size of a kazayis. It has to have the size of a kazayis. But on the other hand, there's another din that it has to be atzura kula. It has to be atzura kula kshi shlema. Shnema tizreim k'meidova. So we learn out man nida eina metame leivarim. Zavi v'edazora eina metame leivarim. Now this din that man nida eina metame leivarim, afa v'edazora eina metame leivarim. We really had this earlier, metame mishka v'meshav, and the Rambam brought the din. The Rambam over there brought the din in Hilchos metame mishka v'meshav periches. Halachadal, he says as Zov shehichnas yodei raglei la'aver klicheres is hail v'leinoga be'v'teche v'lehin nidei harezetor she'ein anida u'kiyetzeba metame leivarim. So over there the Rambam was learning that there's a din that when something finds itself in the aver klicheres, something finds itself in the aver klicheres, so it has to be, it's a davar hametame. And anida is not metame leivarim, and mele it comes out that if the nida, part of the nida, knows her hand, let's say, or the zov, is in the aver klicheres, so it doesn't become tummy. That's how the Rambam says this din of ein anida metame leivarim over there. And over here, the Rambam is saying it differently. The Rambam is saying that an avodah zarah, if part of it is missing, so it's not metame, and he brings over here the ein anida metame leivarim, which is l'chura different than the din of ein anida metame leivarim that was said over there, the pashtus advarim. The pashtus advarim over there is that since not the entire nida is in the keli, so therefore it's not metame ba'aver. It sounds like a different din. And Bamas the Ravid over there argues, the Ravid Tainus, that that's not the taich of ein anida metame beivarim. I'll call upon him over here, l'chura the pshat is that if you have a part of the nida, a nida as an entire person is metame. Masha'inkin of the nida would be just a part of the nida. If you would have an aver of the nida, so then it wouldn't be metame tumas nida. It could be metame different tumas, but it's not metame tumas nida. So al derech over here. If you only have part of the avodah zarah, you don't have the entire avodah zarah, so it's not metame tumas avodah zarah. I'll call upon him. That's how the Rambam brings it over here. That the din that avodah zarah is not metame when it's only part of the avodah zarah, not the entire avodah zarah, is connected to the din of ein anida metame leivarim, which sounds different than how the Rambam brought the din of ein anida metame leivarim earlier. Let's read again. Halacha Gimel. Katzatz aver mimenu. You cut off an aver from the avodah zarah. Afilo hayikum ardeh. There was no. We were talking about a long avodah zarah, which is the size of a mardeh, which is a long stick, which you use in order to direct the animal. Is harezator. Sha'avodah zarah eina metame leivarim. The avodah zarah is not metame leivarim. And those ella hatsura kula k'shi shlema. You have to have the entire tsura k'shi shlema. Shenamar tizreim k'mei dava. So we go in the avodah zarah. You should spread it out. You should spread it away. K'mei dava. So we learn out. So we compare avodah zarah to a dava, to a nida. Man nida eina metame leivarim. If avodah zarah eina metame leivarim. So mele is kekuli ovis atun mislamubos. It has the coolest of the ovis atuma. Nipnei shutumosim devreim is asur kisheretz midrabon she'ein metame b'masa. So on one hand, it's like a sheret that is not metame b'masa, ukemes she'ein metame elu b'kazayis, and also kenida she'ein metame leivarim. So she has three coolest that is not metame b'masa, and it's only metame. It has to be at least a kazayis, and it's also ein metame leivarim. The spark halacha dal, the spark avodah zarah, the zarah fell apart. Was taken apart. It was made up of parts, and then you pulled it apart, and now you could really easily return it. So, and all the ivarim are kayom, so there's no problem of ein avodah zarah metame leivarim, but nevertheless ein metame. So by avodah zarah is metame b'maga and not b'masa. It has to be at least a kazayis. It has to be the entire avodah zarah. It can be metame leivarim, and the entire avodah zarah has to be one piece. In other words, if they're pulled apart, even though you can put them back together, a hedged can put it back together, nevertheless, it's not metame. Halacha kol mishamshi avodah zarah kisheretz. The mishamshi avodah zarah also have a din of a sheretz. V'tam adam v'kelim b'maga uklicheres ba'aver. But the einon metame b'masa, it's not metame b'masa, and v'shir tumason is again because it has to be a kazayis of the mishamshe avodah zarah in order to be metame. V'afilu kotzatz mishamshe kazayis minakeli is mishames kishet metame kishet. So over here by mishamshe there's a chumra legabe avodah zarah atzmo. We said before avodah zarah, if you take off a part of the avodah zarah, even if that part is a kazayis, It's not metame. It's eini metame leivorim. But again, mishamshi avodah zarah. If you have a keli, for example, that's a mishamish of avodah zarah, and you take off from this keli a piece, and that piece is a kezayis, so then it is metame. That's what he's saying. Vafilu kotzas mishamshel. Kezayis min hakeli is metame kesheretz. Zu chemer b'mishamshel yes avodah zarah atzma. That's the chemer of mishamshi avodah zarah from avodah zarah itself. The mishamshi avodah zarah is not only metame when it's complete, but that din is only a din by avodah zarah. Avodah zarah over there is din tizrem k'meidova. Masha'enkim by mishamshi avodah zarah is tomei, and it's even if it's not complete, even as long as it's a kezayis from mishamshi avodah zarah. Zu chomer the mishamshi yesem avodah zarah atzma. Ubeis avodah zarah, which means the bias which is being mishamish avodah zarah. In other words, you have the avodah zarah, and the bias is being mishamish avodah zarah. So again, this bias has a din of mishamshi avodah zarah. Is avonov ve'etzov ve'afrei are all metamen bekezayis b'maga kichol mishamshi. Just like a mishamish avodah zarah is metamen b'maga if it's a kezayis, it doesn't have to be the entire thing. So al derech zeh, the base avodah zarah is considered mishamshi avodah zarah, and also any part of that bias, kezayis, a part of that bias which is a kezayis, is also metamen b'maga like all mishamshi avodah zarah. Halacha vav, hamachnis reishi v'rubei lebeis avodah zarah is nitma kinegeya. Just like when a person knows this din, we learn like al derech bayis hamenuga. Bayis hamenuga, there's a din that when a person finds himself in the bayis hamenuga, so he becomes tummy. So al derech, even though he's not touching anything, he went in reishi v'rubei into bayis hamenuga, he becomes tummy. So al derech, if you walk into a beis avodah zarah, you also become tummy. Hamachnis reishi v'rubei lebeis avodah zarah nitma kinegeya, as if you were touching the Beis Avodah Zarah. V'chein klicheres shehichnas avirei lebeis Avodah Zarah. The aver of the klicheres is in the Beis Avodah Zarah. It's exposed to the Beis Avodah Zarah is also nitma. Now safsolim v'katadrois shehichnas ruban lebeis Avodah Zarah. You have benches, katadrois, like fancy chairs that you put most of it into the Beis Avodah Zarah is also tmeim. And v'kulan rishon l'tumah is nacham al Avodah Zarah is metame. Misham she'Avodah Zarah is metame. The chilik is only avodah zarah is not metame leivorim. Misham she'avodah zarah are metame leivorim. Both of them have to have a kezayis. Both of them is only if it's a negeya. And this din, and there's a new din we're learning that a beis avodah zarah, if you go in reishi v'rubei, or if you have a keli which is reishi v'rubei in a beis avodah zarah, is tummy. Halacha zayin takreves avodah zarah metame b'maga u'b'masek kenevela. So here we have a chumra in takreves avodah zarah legabe avodah zarah legabe misham she'avodah zarah. That takreves avodah zarah is metame b'masa. It's compared to mesim, it's just like a mess is metame b'masa. Al there is a takreves avodah zarah is metame b'maga u b'masa kinevela, and the shiura b'kezayis, and the shir is a kezayis. So the shir of nevela is a kezayis. No, it's really as compared to a mess, but lepel is not metame b'oil. So therefore, it's considered it's metame kinevela. Nachamol takreves avodah zarah metame b'maga u b'masa kinevela v'shiur kezayis. So here the chiddush is that it's also metame b'masa. Now kol davar shemakrivon lo bin basar bin sha'ar eichlon mashkin hakel is kinevela. Shakosov koron zivchei mesim. So zivchei mesim has a din of a mess, and memela it's metame b'magu b'masa. V'afal pi she'ein takreves avodah zarah shel eichlon betelin le'elam lahatir lahano. There's a din avodah zarah. If a goy is mevatel avodah zarah, it becomes us avodah zarah. Once you mevatel the avodah zarah, also the tashmishi avodah zarah become bottled. Now, but takreves avodah zarah can never become bottled. Takreves avodah zarah, once it's takreves avodah zarah, you can't be mevatel it, and it's asur lahano le'elam. But here there's a question. There's a din of isur hano of takreves avodah zarah, and now there's a din of tumas takreves avodah zarah. The question is, does the bittul of takreves avodah zarah, for sure it doesn't help to make it mutar bano, but the question is, does it help to make it not asur bano? That's a suffix. That's what I'm saying. Aval pi she'ein takreves avodah zarah shaleichlum betelim le'elam la'atira bano. However, in bitla, if you are mevatel takreves avodah zarah, harei a suffix l'tumah. There's a suffix if takreves avodah zarah, which you mevatel, at least accomplished. Einach Hanami didn't accomplish to be matir bano, but maybe it would accomplish to take it away from the din tumah. That's been a ger oichel. Aval keli shu takreves avodah zarah shebitlei. That's posher that if the keli shu takreves avodah zarah shebitlei is toher, v'chein avodah zarah u'mishamsheh shebitlo, so then it's no longer asur bano as well. Avidazor Mishamsher Shebitlun is no longer Asr Bano, so then they're certainly there Tahirim. That's Pashat. So a Keli of Takrivas Avidazor is also becomes Toher, is Toher, and Avidazor Mishamsher Shebitlun is Tahirim. They become Mutter Bano. Halacha Ches. Yayin Shenisnasech Lavidazor is also Metame Odom V'Kelim B'Maga, Ukli Cheres B'Masa, and also umetami odam b'masa kinavela, v'tumasi b'kazayas. Now, as we said many times, that the musig of masa is only by an odam. There's no musig of a keli being noisy something. The musig of a keli being noisy something is only by tumas mishka v'meshav. Masha'enkin, the musig of masa, when you say something is metami b'masa, means a person carries the dvar tumas. So the yayin shenes nasach is metami b'mago b'masa. So it's metami odam v'kelim b'masa, and it's also metami klicheres b'aver. And it's also metami odem b'masa kinavela v'tumasa b'kazayis shenemar asher chaylev zv'chayma yechelu yishtu yenesicham. So we learn out how yenesicham kechaylev zv'chaynu. The yenesicham, the yayin that you pour to it, has the same din like the chaylev, the fats that you makriv to it. Ve'em metami tumazu el yayin shenesnasach b'yad lefnei avidazara. A yayin which was actually nesnasach b'yad lefnei avidazara, that yayin is metami. Aval stam yenim shel goyim. Stam yayin shel goyim, which we say, which is asur b'ano midrabanan. Stam yayin shel goyim, the asur b'ano midrabanan, is mitamen to makala k'shar k'mashkin tmei. That is just a din of a tumakala, of a tuma, which that tuma is just a rishon tuma. It has a din like something that was negeh bezov. All goyim have a din of zovim, so it's like mashke that was nageh bezov, which has a din of a rishon tuma. Masha'inkin, this yayin that was nisnasach lavidazara has the din of an avatuma because it can metame odem v'kelim. Odem v'kelim can only nistame through an avatuma. Masha'inkin stam yainam has the din of a rishon l'toma because it's the yayin of a zov. Halacha tes mikol advarim shebiyarna mitchilas hasefer ad kan atolomid she'ovis atumis mehen ovis shel teira mehen ovis shel divri seferim. There are different types of ovis atuma. There's ovis shel teira and there's even ovis divri seferim. The Rambam is agdom to say that Taurus writes there are 29 ovis atuma shel divri teira shel divri seferim. And kol hamistami machmas av shel teira hariu v'lat shel tuma shel teira. So that's how Agdama close what the Rambam is going to say, that there's Avish Shel Teira, there's Avish Shel Devreim, and there's Vladis of Tumah, which come from the Avish Shel Teira, so they're Vlad Minat Teira, and there's Vladis of Tumah, which come from the Avish Midevreim, which are Vlad Midevreim. Now, Kol Av Tumah Shemetami B'maga Ve'ena Metami B'masa. Now, here the rule is that whenever there's an Avatuma, which is only Metami B'maga and not Metami B'masa, for example, a sheretz, ben av shel teira, ben av shel devreim, whether it's an av shel teira, av shel devreim, moshel avidazara, which is av shel devreim, and it's matame b'maga, ve'eni matame b'masa. So the din is adam hanegeh bei, eini matame b'godim b'shas magoy. There's no musig of tumah b'chiburim. Adam hamatame boy, hanegeh bei, eini matame b'godim b'shas magoy, and v'lei adam v'lei klicheres, which is a kolshkeit. That even those that are matami b'godim b'shas magoy are also not matami odem and klicheres. But I'll call upon that's the rule. Din is odem hanegebe and matami b'godim b'shas magoy, and we could add a kolshkina, but the Ram just says v'lei odem v'lei klicheres. Afal pi sha'adayin le'pirish me'matamav, even though this person is still touching this avatuma, which is matami b'maga, he's touching it. So he's tummy, but the keli which he's touching, or the person that he's touching, or the klicheres that he's ba'avira, it doesn't become tummy. V'hinei achar shepirish me'matamav, a kedim she'yifresh vlad, who knows while he's touching it, or while after he's touching it, he has a din of a vlad atuma. And what's the din of a vlad atuma? She'matami echlin, ve'es eis n'shem l'tumah pnei rishon. So he has a din of a regular rishon l'tumah. He touched an avatuma, he's a rishon l'tumah, and he can matami kelim, and the kelim will become a sheni. That's talking about an avatuma, which is metame b'maga ve'ena metame b'masa. Now, v'chol av tumah shemetame b'maga u b'masa. If it's metame sai b'maga sai b'masa, ben av shel teira, ben av shel devreim, which we said before, the mishamshei avidazora, which is shel devreim, is metame b'maga u b'masa, or a nevela is metame b'maga u b'masa. Ben av shel teira, ben av shel devreim, is adam anegeh be'ea nesei, is metame b'godim b'shas magoy b'shas nesiyosei. So while he's touching it or he's carrying it, he's metame b'godim b'shas magoy b'shas nesiyosei. Ve'esa eson rishon l'tumah, and he makes them into a rishon l'tumah. V'chein noga be'oichlin, if he's touching oichlin, is oson rishon. Calls manshali pirish me'metamav. In other words, when he's pirish me'metamav, he makes a misheni, like we'll learn, because he's only a rishon. But since just like he could be metamav a beged to make it into a rishon, so when he's touching oichlin, it also becomes a rishon. V'chein noga be'oichlin oson rishon. Calls manshali pirish me'metamav. However, pirish me'metamav, once he was pirish me'metamav, so now we're talking about something that's matami b'mago b'masa, is harei rishon tuma l'chol davar. Now he has din of a rishon, and therefore ve'ena matami b'godim. Therefore he's not matami b'godim because a rishon could not be matami b'godim. V'noga be'echlin is harei sheni b'tumah. Now this is the general rule of Avos Hatumos, which are matami b'maga u'b'masa. Maga b'masa, so memela they are matami b'chiburim, sai b'maga, sai b'masa, except for two things. All other things, let's say mishkav or meshav, which are metame b'mago b'masa, so they're also metame odam b'chiburim sai kelim b'chiburim sai b'maga sai b'masa. Chutz min hanevela v'hamerkav, except for nevela merkav, which nevela merkav has a different din. What's the difference of nevela merkav? Aval hanevela v'hamerkav aval pi shemetam b'mago b'masa. But there's a difference if they were matamatak b'mago or b'masa. Anigeh b'hem is any matame b'god m'shas magoy. V'imnoga be'echlin, so there can be a risheni l'tumah, because this whole musik of transmitting this tumah because b'chiburim doesn't work by maga, b'nigeh, nevela, and merkav. But when you are on neisei, so then is matame b'god m'shas and siyase, you are matame b'god m'shas and siyase. V'imnoga be'echlin actually pirush. Let's say it again. There are certain Avos Hatumos which are only matame b'maga and not b'masa. There are certain Avos Hatumos which are matame b'maga u b'masa. The general rule is that those Avos Hatumos which are matame b'maga, there's no musig of tumah b'chiburim. Something that's matame b'maga, let's say a sheretz, there's no musig of tumah b'chiburim. So maybe if you touch the sheretz, and while you're touching the sheretz, you're also touching a keli or a beged, so that's not tummy. The beged is not tummy. Because the person's original tumah, he can't be matame the beged. So anything that's matame b'maga, there's no musig of tumah b'chiburim. Generally, something that's matame b'maga u b'masa, something that's matame b'maga u b'masa, so then there is a musig of tumah b'chiburim, and that din of tumah b'chiburim applies side to maga and side to masa. So say if you're touching, say if you're carrying this dover which is matame b'maga u b'masa, so a keli that you're touching, or the beggar that you're wearing also becomes tummy, becomes a rishon l'tummy. There's the musik of a tummy b'chiburim. And when there's tummy b'chiburim b'negei beged, so then oichlim that you touch b'shas ma'isa become a rishon as opposed to a sheni. And that's only while you're still attached to the tumah. Once you're not attached to the tumah, you have a din of a rishon l'tummy. You can't be matame b'godim, but you could be matame oichlim, but the oichlim become a sheni. Now, with the exception of two tumas, that's levela and merkav azov. So by nevela, merkav azov, they are matame b'mago b'masa, but on the other hand, there's a difference between maga and masa. By maga, when you touch a nevela or you touch the merkav azov, so there's no musik of tumah b'chiburim. Masha'ikein, if you're carrying the nevela or you're carrying the merkav azov, there is a din of tumah b'chiburim. That's this rule. Allah yidgim. Mei chatos sheyesh b'm kedei azov, aval pi she'en kenevela u kemerkav, she'en metamen b'godim ela hanoison be'emes. The only ones should be matami begodim by them should only be hanoison. They have be'emes a din, that they have a din of a nevela that only matami hamesom. But nevertheless, lepeil is arinegebe matami begodim b'shas magoyim mishum nesi. Aylechur is only a maga. She'yevshe she'yige b'mayim shel yasatesim. There's no mitzvah that a person touches the water and he didn't move the water. So mele, since there's no mitzvah that a person touches it without carrying it, so you know be'emes. Hilchis Nigeya, he shouldn't be matame b'chiburim. He shouldn't be matame b'chiburim. He's only matame b'chiburim b'nigeya, the main nida, which I have kedei azor mitzad denoisi. But lepel, there's no echetimtza of a maga without a masa. That's what he's saying. Sheyev sheshiya b'mayim shel yosudesim. Kvar biyanu she'echad hanesei echad hamesit. When a person moves something that is of a nesei, so memela, since it's impossible to touch it without moving it, so memela you become a nesei. V'chein hanigeya b'tzemer hanevela. Person, there's a nevela, which a nevela is matame b'mago b'masa, And we just said that if it's metame b'maga, there's no tumah b'chiburim. Only when it's metame b'masa is there tumah b'chiburim. So the what happens if you're touching the tzemer of a nevela? The tzemer of a nevela is also metame because it's considered part of the nevela. Eshanaga b'nimei hamerkav. You have a merkav, something, and there's like threads that are sticking out of the merkav, and you're touching those threads. Is also metame b'godim b'shas magoy. While you're touching these threads, or while you're touching this tzemer hanavela, you also be metame. You're metame b'godim b'shas magoy b'shum nesi. She'evshel l'negeh b'dvarim elu shel yosotesem. Lefichach metame b'godim ashli pirish kidin hanesi. So that's this din. The din is nochamal that benevela, negeh benevela is not metame b'chiburim kelim. Hanesis hanevela is metame b'chiburim. Be'emes mechatos also. Hanegeh b'mechatos shouldn't be metame b'chiburim. The only thing that's metame b'chiburim by mechatos is because you're noisei mechatos. When you're noisei mechatos is metame kelim b'chiburim. But nevertheless, benegeh mechatos, it's not shaykh as echatimtza that you should be on negeh without a noisei. Because when you're in a negeh, you're a meset, and a meset has a noisei. Benegeh nevela, it is shaykh as a nevela. If you have a piece of nevela, bosser of nevela, so you touch the nevela, you're not metame kelim b'chiburim. Mashenkin, if you have a nevela and that nevela has semer on it, so then, or you have a merkav and that merkav, for example, has nimim coming out of it, and you touch it. So when you touch it, so inevitably you'll also move it. And memela you have a din of a nesei. Once you have a din of a nesei, so memela you metame kelim b'chibur. Halacha yudalit. Habileya nivlos eifator is b'shaz b'liyosei is metame b'godim k'mesha b'yarno. He becomes tamei mitzad bileya. And he's also metame b'godim b'chiburim, and v'hein rishon l'tumah, and they become a rishon l'tumah. V'cheinim noga b'eichlin, if he touches oichlin while he was being beleya, this nivlos iftar is also harein rishon l'tumah, like we learned before. That anything that could be while b'shas ma'aser you've been metame b'godim, so obviously means you're transmitting the tumah. So memela, so you could also be metame oichlin. They should become a rishon rather than a sheni. However, va'acher shabola is a pirish mematamav. He's no longer a mechuber lematamav. He's a pirish mematamav. And memela, so he could metame oichlin, and they become a sheni. He can be metame. He can be metame kelim. He'll be metame oichlin mashkin. He'll become a sheni. Halacha tezvav. Haseiref para aduma or parim usrir manusrafim. Someone that's involved in burning the para aduma or the parim usrir manusrafim. Or v'hamishalech es hasor, the person that brings the sor la'azazel, is aval pi shebishas ma'aseyan metame b'godim k'mesha b'yanu. Nevertheless, af im nogu be'echlin afilu b'shas ma'aseyan marein shein l'tumah. Sachidish dikadin. That even though while they're doing what they're doing, they are metame b'godim, they are metame, their b'godim are atame. So, but masha'inkim b'negei oichlin, the oichlin become a shein l'tumah, because over there, when a person is being, there's normally when a person is metame b'godim b'chiburin, the pshat is that be'emes there's an avatum here. The avatum is making him into a rishon. So the chura, since it's making him into a rishon, now that he's a rishon, he should be making the next thing into a sheni. Now the din is that since he's mechuber to the av, so just like the av is making him into a rishon, so al derech zeh he is ki'ilu transmitting the tumah to the begodim. So mele it's kilu, he and the begodim are one, and they're both being makabel tumah from this avatumah. That's the gather. No, so mele, just like if the kalim would have touched the avatumah, they would have become a rishon. So if the oichlin would have touched the avatumah, it also would have become a rishon. So mele is kilu, the oichlin touched the avatumah. Over here, b'negei ha'seiref para adum and al deras is manusrafim. There's no avatumah here that's transmitting tumah. There is a din that a seirif is a para, or the seirif of the Sirman Esrafim, Mishalech is Azazel. There's a din that he becomes tamei, and the din is also that his begotten become tamei. That's the din of the seirif. It's not. There's no transmitting of tumah over here. Now that din has only been negay the seirif and negay the begotten. Masha'enkin the kalim. There's no such a din. The kalim have nothing to do with the seirif as the seirif, and therefore since he's touching the kalim. And lepel, he's only a rishon, and there's no transmitting of tumah. So memela, the begodim, the oichlim only have a din of a sheni. That's the pashtus adin. And lefiza it'll come out that let's say the oichlim are going to touch the actual sorah mishtaleach and not the person that's bringing the sorah mishtaleach. He'll be torah. Whereas the Eichel doesn't become Torah from the Sorah Mishtalech, doesn't become Tamei from the Sorah Mishtalech. It could become Tamei from the person that's bringing the Sorah Mishtalech. It has no yachas to the Sorah Mishtalech. In other words, if the Eichel would be on the top of the Sorah Mishtalech, so Bepashtus, that's what the Mishnah Mel says. Bepashtus, he would be Torah. It would be Torah. And that's not like the Kesef Mishnah. Kesef Mishnah comes out differently. The Ramora brings the 2 days over here. But I'll call upon him, that's l'chura the Havanas Advarim. The Havanas Advarim is that there's no tumah that's being transmitted over here. There's a din that a person that's Shalech as Hasar becomes tumah. So no Metzias of tumah. And that tumah applies to him and applies to his begadim. It has nothing to do with his with the Eichel. The Eichel, he can be Matami. Once he's tumah, he can be Matami. Halacha Tezayin. Now we learned already, the Kesef Mishnah speaks it out in Perek Tes and Tumas Mes, that the tara of a mikveh happens when the person starts going out of the mikveh. In other words, when a person is tummy and he's immersed in the mikveh, so he's not yet tor. When does he become tor? He becomes tor when it's when he starts coming out of the mikveh. Al derez if you have a keli which has to be immersed in the mikveh, so the fact that the keli is in the mikveh doesn't make it tor. In order for it to be tor, it has to be taken out of the mikveh in order to be tor. That's din number one. Then there's a din number two, that a keli, even though it's in the mikveh, the keli that's in the mikveh could become tamei. Whereas if the being in the mikveh would be metaher, so then there would be a svara to say that if the mikveh is metaher, certain the mikveh doesn't let it become tamei. Masha'enkin, once we establish that it's not that the mikveh is metaher, the mikveh is only metaher when it comes out of the mikveh. So while it's in the mikveh, it could become tamei. That's number two. And l'chura is something that's tamei be'etzem a nevela. So a nevela that's in a mikveh, there's no musig of tara. So the fact that the nevela is in the mikveh is certainly l'chura not going to make any difference. L'chura are pashtus the kef. Halacha tezayin. Hanigeh ba'av mi'ovis hatumis hamushloch b'tech hamikveh. Someone that touches an av mi'ovis hatumis which is in the mikveh, kigei nevela, a sheretz, a mishkov shehu b'mikveh, v'nogabei is arizah tomei. Is l'chura when a person touches a mishkov which is b'mikveh, so there's a chiddush that l'chura the mikveh should be metayr the mishkov, and nevertheless the mikveh is not metayr the mishkov because the mishkov is in the mikveh and it's not out of the mikveh. It didn't come out of the mikveh like we just mentioned. L'chura the sheretz or the nevela is not such a chiddush because the sheretz and the nevela b'chal can become torah. So the fact that the sheretz or the nevela are in the mikveh l'chura is not a chiddush. The chura, there's also a din, and Pasha the Mepharshim explain that this din of a negeh ba'av me'ovis hatumis hamushlo b'tech hamikveh is even if the negeh is immersed in the mikveh. Whereas the person is completely in the mikveh and he's touching something which is in the mikveh. So again, he's tummy. He's tummy to the extent that until he comes out, he's tummy. The minaf can mean that he's tummy. Let's say if under the mikveh he'll be touching something which cannot become Torah, let's say Eichel and Mashkin, which cannot become Torah, so Mele he'll be Matami the Eichel and Mashkin, so at that point in time he's Tamei. Whereas a person that's immersed in a mikveh could become Tamei, because, and the item which is immersed in the mikveh could remain Tamei. No, there is no Chiddush that it remains Tamei, but even Mishkov or Meshav, which can become Torah through a mikveh, they only become Torah from the mikveh when you come out of the mikveh. I mean, look, you have to understand why the Ram puts all these dinim together. And the same l'chura is two separate inyanim. Let's read again. Halacha tezayin. Hanigeh ba'av mi'ovis hatumis hamushloch b'tech hamikvah. The person touches in this av. L'chura, he's also immersed in the mikvah. Kigei nevela isheretz a mishkov shu b'mikvah v'nogabei is arizah tomei shenamar achmayon uber mikvah mayim yetor or v'negeh b'nevlosim tomei. So you negeh b'nevlosim tomei afilu k'shehem b'tech hamikvah. Even if these things are in the mikvah, is metame, so they're metame, and he also is tummy, and he's also tummy, even though he's in the mikvah. Ukshiyal min mikvah, when he goes out of the mikvah, is zahanegeh yiter. The person that was negeh will become tor. V'hanoison, and the person that's noisei, these are nevela, let's say, in the mikvah, is also metame begodim b'shas nisiyosam. While he's carrying this nevela, while he's in the mikvah, so he's becoming tummy, and the scales are becoming tummy. V'mnoga be'echlon actually pirish is areim rishon l'tumah k'misha b'yarno. All these dinim apply. In other words, the fact that he's in the mikveh, the veil is in the mikveh, all is not relevant. It's not negeh. It's not negeh. Negeh is a person could be in a mikveh and be tummy, and the keli could be in the mikveh and be tummy. V'chein zov shedoras ala mishkav shehumunach b'mikvah. You have a mishkav which is in the mikvah, and now the zov was doras on this mishkav which is in the mikvah. Is there a mishkav tummy? The mishkav becomes tummy. Ukshiyala hamishkav and mikvah. Only when the mishkav comes out of the mikvah, that's yitar. Shaharei also litfila, because now it was also litfila. When was also litfila? The also litfila when he goes out. V'zeh hanegeh b'mishkav kshehu b'mikvah, and this negeh b'mishkav which is in the mikvah is in poshet yodei v'negeh chutz l'mikvah is areze metami b'godim. Ve'en tzorich loy mishum metami echlon mashkin. In other words, that's talking about a person that's negeh b'mishkav when the mishkav is in the mikvah and his hand is sticking out. He's still a negeh b'mishkav. He's still a negeh b'mishkav while the mishkav is in the mikvah, and lepel he's sticking his hand out of the mikvah. So in poshet yodei v'negeh chutz l'mikvah is areze metame b'godim ve'en tzorich loy mishum metami echlon mashkin. And lechura, you have to understand what the chiddush is, because lechura, even the begodim that he's wearing right now is also tummy. Lechura, the begodim that he's wearing right now is tummy. What's the chiddush over here? Nachamo. V'zeh negeh b'mishkav kshehu b'mikvah. The mishkav is in the mikvah, and he's touching the mishkav which is in the mikvah. And he's being poshet yodei, and he's touching chutz l'mikvah to something else. So he's touching the mishkav which is in the mikvah, and he's touching something else which is out of the mikvah. So it's areze metame begodim ve'en tzorich leimish metame echlon mashkin. And what would be if it would be negeh b'mishkav kshu b'mikvah, and he would be poshet yodei, and his negeh chutz l'mikvah in something which poshet yodei and his negeh in the mikvah is also tummy. You have to understand what's the chiddush that is dafke in the mikvah. Let's read the halacha one more time. Halacha tezayin. Hanegeh ba'av mi'ovis hatumos hamushlich b'teich hamikvah kigein nevela a sheretz a mishkav shu b'mikvah. So all these things that are metame are in the mikvah, and v'nogabe and someone touches it, that is a tummy. The person becomes tummy. Shneimar ach mayin ober mikvah mayim yator v'negeh b'nevlasim yitma. So we learn now filuk shem b'teich hamikvah. So all these things which are metame, even if these things are metame, even these things are metame, afiluk shem b'teich hamikvah metame. Sai, we're talking about an avela, a sheretz, or a mishkov. Okay. Then ukshiyala min mikvah, when this person that was touched these things while they were in the mikvah, he was yala min mikvah, is the anigayita, then he becomes tar. He touched something was matame, and he becomes tar when he's yala min mikvah. Like we said before, in the mikvah you're not tar. You're tar only when you're yala min mikvah. That's talking about touching. Hanoison, someone that's carrying it, which we said before, b'negeh nevela, so over there, or a mishkav. So when you carry it, you also metame b'godim b'chiburim v'hanoison metame b'godim b'shas n'siyosim. So this didn't apply side to a negeah and side to a nesei. So if you're negeah something that's in the mikveh, you become tummy, and you become tar when you go out. When you nesei something that's in the mikveh, you become tummy, and you metame also the b'godim that you're touching, or the oichel that you're touching. Kamesha b'yarn. V'chein zov shedoras ala mishkav shu munach b'mikveh. So now the zov now is being metame this mishkav through drisa. That's munach b'mikvah, a mishkav tummy. It became tummy in the mikvah. Before we were talking about it was tummy and it was in the mikvah. Now we're talking about it becomes tummy while it's in the mikvah. Ukshiyala mishkav mikvah yitar. And when is the mishkav going to become tar? Only when it's yala mishkav. That's when it's yilta. Shari also litvila. V'zeh negeh b'mishkav kshu b'mikvah. Someone that touches the mishkav arib b'mikvah is in poshet yadiv and negeh chutz l'mikvah as a reason metame b'godim ve'en tzorich leimish metame echlon mashkin. So I'm not sure really why l'chura negeh b'mishkav kshu in poshet yadiv and negeh chutz l'mikvah. And obviously we're talking about he's still touching this mishkav. He's touching v'zeh negeh b'mishkav and he's poshet yadiv. So in Mele is metame the begodim and tzarich leima echlon mashkin. L'chura, this din is also by things that are in the mikveh itself. L'chura.